Good morning, Hope Church Worcester. It's lovely to see. My name's Andrew Davies, and it's a real joy to be able to come and speak to you. I'm speaking here in Pontypridd as I lead the church here in Rydfelyn, part of Pontypridd, and it's such a strange season, isn't it? Here I am in my house, speaking to you in your homes, whichever room you're in. Some of you will be in the lounge, kitchen, bedrooms. Do you remember the days when we used to actually have to get dressed to go to church, and now you can just sit there and watch it online? Be prepared that when we do come back together again, remember you can't come in your pajamas. But it's a real joy to be able to bring something to you today, and I want to bring something into the situation that we're facing. I hope this will bring an encouragement. I hope this will just stir you a little bit and give you a bit of hope. I want to speak on Paul's last journey that he ever takes. And you would think this is Paul's last journey. He's been an amazing ambassador for Jesus, hasn't he? From that moment that he met Jesus on the road to Damascus, he's just been incredible. The way he's gone round and served and planted churches and discipled leaders and taught the church. And you're going to sit there and think, oh, he's going to be given a treat near the end of his life. Especially as this is a trip that God has promised him. See, God spoke to Paul while he was in prison that he would one day take his case to Caesar in Rome. So Paul knows he's going to go to Rome. And because of that, he actually says, I want to take my case to Caesar in Rome. And probably if he hadn't said that, he may well have been released from prison. But he heard God. And as a result, he's got this trip. But it's maybe not the trip he was expecting. You'd kind of look at it and say, oh, come on, God. He's been an amazing ambassador. Give him a lovely Mediterranean cruise to end his life. A lovely trip, a trip where he can relax and it can be fun. But no, as we see today, as we look at the passage in Acts 27, actually, he's in a shipwreck. He goes into a storm. And isn't it funny how so often as we live with promise, we find ourselves in storms, we find ourselves in difficult times where things maybe aren't quite as we anticipated as the clock is striking in the background. There are moments where actually maybe this wasn't as I thought it was going to be worked out. You think, there's that strange passage where it says, God loved Jacob and Esau he hated. But actually, if you look at both their lives, you could say, well, Esau's life seems really nice. He gets to stay at home and ends up being very wealthy. While Jacob goes from living here to living here, battling here, this happening, just like this mess of a life. And yet he's living with promise. And it's funny, when you're people who live with promise, it doesn't guarantee an easy life. Sometimes it's shaken, it's hard. See, Paul goes on this trip, and let me read it from verse 3. The next day we put into Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go to his friends and be cared for. And putting out to sea from there, he sailed under the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. And when we had sailed across the open sea along the coast of Sicily and Pamphylia, we came to Myra near Lycia, where the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy and put us on board. We sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty in Critias. And as the wind was not allowing us to go farther, we sailed unto the lee of Crete off Salmone. Coasting along, it was difficult. We came to a place called Fair Havens. Hey, I can pronounce that one. Near which was the city of Lycia. Since much time had passed and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be of injury and much loss, not only for the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives. But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. And because the harbour was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea. From there on the chance that somehow they would reach Phoenix, a harbour of Crete, both facing southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. This is around late October. We know that because it says the fast was over. So we know this is around the late October time. During this time, between November and March, no sailing was allowed in the Mediterranean. That was the dangerous zone. So they are right on the edge of the sort of the red zone. This is sort of a dangerous time to sail. And what you see on this trip is there are a number of different authorities on the boat. You've got the centurion, he carries military authority. You've got the captain or the pilot, he carries maritime authority. And then you've got the owner, he carries commercial authority. And also you've got Paul, who carries spiritual authority. Now, it's interesting, isn't it? Because at this moment of this trip, no one is listening to spiritual authority. Do you notice that? Just as they're kind of coming to this point on the trip, they're thinking they should set sail, and Paul gets up and says, I really don't think that's a good idea. I really don't think that you should do this. I suspect we're going to lose everything and maybe our lives. But you've got three other authorities who probably are seen as knowing better than Paul. So you've got the centurion, you've got the pilot, you've got the owner. And the pilot and the owner say, no, we'll continue. So the centurion listens to them, not Paul. And here's Paul who's got spiritual authority, but at the moment, it's not being listened to. It's interesting. When you're in the storm, spiritual authority is then listened to. As we go on in the story, you'll see that actually when Paul stands up next time and speaks, everyone listens to him. And I just feel at this moment, as we're kind of in the storm of lockdown and of the coronavirus, this is a moment where the church and the spiritual authority that God has given us, this is a time for us to speak. This is a time where maybe we've spoken in the past and people are saying, no, we'll listen to the economist. No, we'll listen to this person. We'll listen to this person. We'll listen to these authorities and not you. This is going to be a moment where when we stand, as Hope Church Worcester stands and makes statements and shows love and shows encouragement, your authority will be recognised and will be listened to. See, what's interesting is they actually make the wrong call. Because it goes on in verse 20, where neither, I love this, this is like Luke writing in pure Shakespearean, or should we say Shakespeare writes in Lucian version. Okay, it's great, it's so graphic. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest laid on us, all hope of being saved was last abandoned. Since they'd been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said what you should never said. Men, you should have listened to me and not sailed from Crete and incurred the injury and the loss. Yet now I urge you, take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. That's good news for everyone apart from the owner. For this very night there stood before me an angel of God, whom I belong to, whom I worship. And he says, do not be afraid. Paul, you must stand before Caesar, and behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that he will do exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on the island. When the 14th night had come, and they were being driven against the Adriatic Sea, about midnight the sailors suspected they were nearing land. So they took soundings and found 20 fathoms. A little further they found a soundings of 15 fathoms. And fearing they might run on the rocks, they let down the anchors from the stern and prayed for the day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship and lowered the ship's boats into the sea under the pretense of laying out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, unless those men stay on the ship, you cannot be saved. The soldiers cut away the ropes of the ships and let it go. And as day was dawn, Paul urged them, take some food. Today is the 14th day. You've continued in suspense and without food, having taken nothing. Therefore I urge you, take food, for it will give you strength, for not a hair to perish on the head of any of you. And with these things he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of all he broke. And they were encouraged and ate food for themselves. I love this. I just want to quickly go through how Paul was able to bring encouragement to those in the storm. And he was able to do it firstly because he himself was encouraged. It's important that in this time, we are still a people who are getting encouraged so that we can encourage others. It's an emotional time, isn't it? I know, don't about you, I'm an emotional being, so it's a bit of a roller coaster ride for me. You know, days I feel great, days I feel, you know, and actually it's this kind of roller coaster, but actually I need to be encouraged so that I can encourage others. Firstly, Paul was encouraged because He was not alone. Luke is traveling with him. He's got others who are traveling with him. Before he sets sail, he has this amazing time where he's with other believers who minister to him. He's not alone. It's really important in this season, even if you are isolated and if you're on your own, to recognize there are others who love you and are with you and are praying for you. It's important that at these times we're honest with one another. We don't keep up a smiley face, but actually we're honest so people can minister to us. We are not alone. I remember when I had my cluster headaches and I was really suffering and I was in a lot of pain. One of the great moments, a friend of mine knocked on the door one day, opened the door. It was my friend Mark. He came in, he had a bottle of wine in one hand, some paracetamols in the other hand, and he said, I didn't know which one you wanted. And I said, the one in the middle. I just wanted a friend. We're not alone. The second reason Paul could be encouraged is he's encountered God. I don't know about you, but boy, we need to encounter God at the moment. We need to have those moments where just we are meeting with him, whether it's in the word of God, whether it's seeing an angel, whether it's being filled with the Spirit. But we need to encounter God and take the encouragement that our God is there for us. He also knew who he was. It's interesting, he stands up and he says, I belong to him and I serve him. He, in front of this motley crew of sailors, guards and prisoners, stands and says, I know who I am. This is a season, Hope Worcester, where you need to remember who you are. You belong to him. It's him you serve. You have been purchased with the blood of Christ. You're his. Also, he remembers the promise. The angel comes to Paul and says, remember what God has told you. And so he stands in front of the crowd and says, God has promised. He remembers those promises. And then ultimately, he also knows that God answers prayers. You notice the angel says that actually, behold, God has granted all those who are sailing with you. That language implies that Paul was not just praying for his own safety, but the safety of all those on the boat. At this moment in time, Hope Church Worcester, remember the promises God has made to you. Remember that he is listening and has inclined his ear to your prayers so that we can be encouraged. We can be encouraged by the fact that we are not alone, that we are encountering God, that we know who we belong to, that we serve him, that we remember his promises, that we remember his prayers. Why? So that we can encourage others. So that in the storm we can stand with authority and bring encouragement to those around us. How? By being in the storm. Do you notice that Paul is not in a separate boat? He's on the same boat as them. He's in the storm with those around. So when he stands up, they know he's going through the same things. We are going through the same things as our neighbours, as our friends, as the people in our cities and towns. We're with them in the storm. You know, even remember Job's friends when they turned up and were with Job to start with. Actually, they did well till they opened their mouths. Sometimes we just need to say we're with people. We encourage them by praying for them, praying for those who are going hardship at this moment in time, praying for those who are grieving, praying for those who are struggling financially. That is in God's heart. Be praying for it. I love the fact that Paul brings encouragement as well by saying, right, it's time to eat. And he takes the bread and he feeds those around. This is going to be a time where we bring encouragement in the storm by showing very practical care, just like Paul did. Fourthly, we're going to show example and encouragement by setting a good example. You know, Paul, they'd obviously watched him. And he was, he went through it like all the others on the boat. But yet, he had a faith and he could bring encouragement in the storm. And ultimately, we bring encouragement by telling them the good news. This is a season for people to hear the good news of Jesus Christ. So I hope this is encouraging to you. We need to be a people who in the storm are encouraged ourselves so that we can grow in the spiritual authority that God has put on us. We do that by meeting together, by encountering God, by knowing we belong to him and serve him, by remembering his promises, by remembering his answered prayers, so that, and this is the bit I love, this is for now and the future, so that we can encourage those that God has sent us to minister to, those around us, by being in the storm with them, by praying for them, by showing practical care to them, by setting a good example in the way we live, and by telling them the great news of Jesus Christ. If you're in the storm today and actually you feel like I've got no hope, can I encourage you, get in touch with Hope Church Worcester. Get one of them to pray and to care for you. If you're in the church and you're part of the church, but actually you're just feeling a bit isolated, contact someone so you know you're not alone. And my prayer for all of you is that today you encounter the living God, so you can be encouraged and grow into the spiritual authority that God's got for you, and you can show that to others. Thank you. It's been great being with you. Bless you all.